And we're excited to continue to bring large major events to Minneapolis, to downtown Minneapolis, and continue to bring people here and see how we can continue to impact the next chapter of downtown Minneapolis. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful panel. Thank you, R.T., Beth, and David for being here and hear what they have to say about what's next for downtown.
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be here. This is one of my favorite spots downtown. I love the porch. And when one of my pet projects gets done next year, which is to turn Nicollet Mall into America's Winter Street, this will be a perfect spot. More on that later. But let's introduce ourselves. I'm R.T. Rybak. I am the CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation. I'm going to say nice things about these people before I introduce them. When we looked around for some people to help us do a report about what's next for downtown, we put together an all-star team. David Frank, one of the smartest things I ever did at the city was to bring in David Frank to help us navigate through many different development issues. When you see the Kmart being torn down, thankfully, that's his work. When you see the work he's done as a private citizen, as the original head of the North Loop Neighborhood Association, when people see all the things, that's David. When you see ambassadors who are going around the street, who are picking up things and keeping them clean, when you see the commons, that's Beth's work. Not here is Sarah Harris, the third member of this incredible trio, who has done an enormous number of projects downtown too. So I'm really proud to be here with them. Do you want to just say hi before I start us off?
Hi, everybody. Excited to be here, excited to talk about the work that we've done and everyone's place in it.
Thanks so much for having us. And I got my holiday shopping figured out. I'll tell you more about that.
We want to know more, David. Thank you.
That's coming.
It's really, really great to have you here. And I just think that this organization is terribly important. You know, having been part of a number of these events, I know a number of you have been as well. It's really important to pay attention to Saturday afternoon as people from big events like this come in and explore our city. I also think it's really important to look at the things like volleyball tournaments that bring tons of parents in. But this is an enormously important part of our economy. So thank you for the great events that are coming in March. Meanwhile, I'm going to be part of the World Cup cross-country ski race at Worth. So it is great to bring people to this community in the winter. Why are we talking about downtown? We're not the downtown council. We're not elected officials. Why would we want to have a conversation about downtown? Well, I think the reason for that is too often city building becomes a spectator sport. And especially these days, people will look around saying, who's the hero who's going to quote unquote save downtown? Well, the fact of the matter is, look in the mirror, ladies and gentlemen. We have an incredible downtown where phenomenal things have happened. There really haven't been individual heroes. There have been many, many people over many decades who, in spite of huge headwinds for cities for decades, have made this a vital downtown. We are again at a crossroads. We also have incredible capacity to do big things. And so the Minneapolis Foundation has no standing in this conversation any more than any of us did, but we chose to step into this, as we hope you do too, to figure out what can you do to advance a new vision for where downtown goes next. So the Downtown Next report, which these two and Sarah authored, will be coming out in about a week. And let me give you a top line on the perspective we had at the Minneapolis Foundation as we jumped into it. I try never to repeat stories I've said in public. I'm going to do that again only because this one helps illustrate it. I want to take you back in the 80s. If some of you have heard this, just ignore me. But in the 80s, I was working at the Downtown Council, and I brought an out-of-town visitor to the top of the IDS, motioned out of this great city we have through huge windows, and I was so excited, and the person looked out, paused, looked one way or the other, and turned back to me, and he said, "Where is it?" Now, think about that for a second, those of you who have been around for a while. That was really humiliating, but it was completely true. These blocks we were in, these 4, 5, 6 blocks, were very vital. Dayton's probably the best department store in the country at the time. All of that was vital. But now think about, remember I mentioned North Loop? That was just pretty much abandoned warehouses. The riverfront that we are so rightfully proud of now, railroad tracks and almost nothing was built out there. The Stone Arch Bridge was fenced off. You could look over at the Metrodome and absolutely nothing was around that stadium that everybody knew was about to be replaced, and Loring had very little going. Now I tell that story to start this because with all of the draconian visions and narratives we hear about downtown, the fact of the matter is we are a dramatically more vital place. You do not go to a great city and walk 6 blocks and then walk them all over again. We go through a series of villages. Visualize going through a great city, London, Barcelona, Rio, name it. When you go through it, you stroll and you experience different climates, different cultures, different types of activity. We are now much more like that. We are a collection of villages from the river to the North Loop, to Easttown, to Loring, across the river, Central. All of that together creates a much more vital downtown. When you were in New York and you take a walk and you walk a mile, that's not that big a deal. When you walk from one end of the North Loop to the football stadium, that is less than that walk that you take. And we have to get used to the fact that we sit in our little pockets, but we need to move around more. We also need to have a plan that has a new vision for instance, this central area, which will not be continuous retail. But we need to really take some of the great ideas that are out there and really get people with great insight to help interpret them, which is what we have done in the Downtown Next report. So what I want to do now is to turn it over to David and Sarah to talk about what's in this report. The report is not a be-all and end-all of what should happen. It was simply our attempt to put together in one place many of the ideas that are out there and a series of new ones. I want you, as you hear these, to each think, which of these will you be part of making happen? It is not a spectator sport. So as they go through these, I hope each of you can figure out what piece that you can play in making this happen. Let me turn it over to David.
Thanks, RT. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Good morning. Beth and I are glad to be here. It's always fun to visit with a new bunch of people to talk about the great work that RT and Beth and Sarah and I had a chance to do together. I'm going to talk about 2 things from the report. There are more, but we've chosen 2 for you this morning from me. And then Beth will talk about 2, and then we'll tie them all together. We're going to leave some time for question and answer. I'm going to predict ahead of time what your questions will be. We'll see how we do. I'm going to talk about downtown as a series of villages and about some public and private projects that we think should happen in the short term. And then Beth is going to talk about 2 things. She's going to talk about turning downtown, the core, from an 8-hour part of town to a 24-hour part of town. And then she's going to talk about the single biggest idea in our whole report, and that's to involve more people in what downtown will be next, Downtown Next. So my 2 things, villages and public and private, right? As RT has said, the core, I'm going to start talking about the core, right? The 6 blocks centered around 6th, 7th, 8th, Nicollet, Marquette, like that, right? When people say downtown, I have found they tend to mean right there, right? I went to a city council member's lunch and somebody raised their hand and said, actually, most of downtown is doing fine, right? What we're really talking about is the core, which is really not doing fine, right? So this is not a beat up on the core of the central business district, but rather teasing out the idea that we think that we need a different approach to what we are calling the villages, the different villages of downtown Minneapolis. I happen to live in the village called North Loop, right? It's doing pretty great, depends on your perspective, but it's doing pretty great, right? Other parts of town which barely existed in people's minds, let's talk about the east part of downtown with a beautiful new stadium for some sports and events, right? See what I did there? And also people living and also fantastic access to the riverfront and bike trails and culture, right? And Loring and Elliott and across the river in Northeast and Southeast, right? Most places are doing at least okay, if not really well. When we are talking about make downtown better, we're like, let's be honest, we're mostly talking about the part right around where we're sitting and visiting today. And the approach to making where we are right now better, if you will, is different from what we should be doing in other places. Some places may not need much at all. Some places might need a little bit of help with some retail recruitment or something. And other places, like in the core or the warehouse district, might be ripe for some office to residential conversions, right? So like what should happen in each place needs to be somewhat different. And we have some detailed suggestions for what happens in some of those places throughout the report, and we'll touch on a few of those as we go. The second thing I want to mention, and this tends to get more attention than the others, that's why we're putting it sort of right in the middle, right? We can talk more about this later, is some of the projects, the big, let's call them development projects that have been talked about for a long time. Every time I mention to friends, or Beth and I were talking, or Beth and Sarah and I were talking with RT, the topic of the post office would come up. And to be clear, we're talking about the post office that's on the central riverfront that by most measures blocks access by the public to the riverfront. There's been lots and lots of talk of if you could just knock down that parking ramp, you'd have much better access from Nicollet and Hennepin to the riverfront. It could be an amphitheater, and on and on. There have been a series of efforts, none of them has especially gone anywhere over time. We are urging the public sector mostly to step forward, to work hard to make this project happen. I was in a meeting yesterday, and 3 different private sector developers, property owners of note, were saying, could we please get something going? We are prepared to spend money here. This is a case of the public sector. If they could get this done, not step up, they're working on it, but if they could get this done, it would unlock a lot of private investment, and with that, some property tax base. And it is worth just pausing here to talk about property tax base, right? So I heard yesterday, I think this is roundly true, that downtown contributes half, 50% of the property tax collections for the city and for Hennepin County. Half, right? So as we read in the paper, those articles about the mortgages that are coming due for the office buildings and tenants not being there and the valuations going down, that's not just woe is them on the property owners and the investors. That is also bad for all the residential property taxpayers, because presumably that money is going to be collected from somewhere. I don't see most of those programs going to zero that the public is spending money on, right? So be that police or affordable housing or teacher salaries or whatever. A few other project type developments to mention to you besides the post office. I get a little bit of applause on this sometimes, so feel free if you like. Moving the buses off of Nicollet. Anybody? Oh, okay. Okay, let's talk about that in Q&A if not everybody's enthusiastic about that. Doing a pilot project along maybe the north block of the mall between 3rd and Washington, between the new Four Seasons Gateway Building and Cancer Survivors Park, Marquette Plaza, something else, and turning it into a publicly accessible plaza without buses going by all the time, preserve access for people in wheelchairs and bicycles and strollers and on foot, but close it to vehicular traffic and show how that could really benefit attracting people to the area and giving people a place to go. We're sitting in the Skyway, so this is a good time to talk about Skyways, right? We have a couple of ideas in the report about what I think RT likes to call the Skyway Highway, right? We could let go of the idea that every Skyway needs to be open all the time, but enhance the idea that some Skyways, the big connections, whatever, should be open much more of the time or all the time, and work intensively with private property owners to make that happen. And also, in the spirit of vitality and getting retail to succeed, prioritize retail that is at street level and services, like, where we're sitting in this beautiful space, at the Skyway level. If we're going to have more housing downtown, and if some of that should be available to people who are older and need services and don't want to engage with the snow and the ice on the streets all the time, Skyways are good for them. They need a way to get around and get to services, be it a doctor's appointment or an accountant or something else. But retail, we could prioritize at street level. And close to lastly, incent property owners to make investments in that ground floor space through some new public programs we are suggesting, and working with arts organizations and doing some engagement about what people would like to see that could bring them downtown. Beth will talk much more about engagement. So those are my two things, and we'll have a chance to talk more about this in question and answer. My two things: downtown as villages, don't prioritize and treat everything the same, and also what are some of the public and private things that we could do. Here comes Beth to talk about turning downtown from an 8-hour city to a 24-hour city and involving many more people, not just the regular suspects, in what downtown should be next. Beth.
Thanks. Thanks, David. So David spoke about when we talk about downtown is having trouble, downtown is failing, what we're really talking about is the core. And part of the reason that the core feels so empty is because it has too long been focused. It has too long been a monoculture. It's been focused on the office worker. It's focused on a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, 8 to 7, whatever it is, the workday. And in order to create a resilient city, a city with a full ecosystem of economic and social and cultural systems that can support a thriving community, we need to change our thinking about that. And so that is going to include a diversity of uses and users. A lot more residents mean we need a lot more little shops. We need bodegas. We need grocery stores. We need daycares. We need dry cleaners. We need gorgeous banks like this one. And in so doing, we create that resiliency. So that would include conversion of building spaces, and whether it's from office to residential, but also, as David foreshadowed, at the street level, creating retail space, smaller retail spaces, which would enable entrepreneurs to come in and create unique business opportunities that provide both a cultural and a social benefit, that also might be opportunities for entrepreneurs of very diverse group to present what is authentically them, what is authentically Minnesota, and create a economic system where we can be supporting not only the big tenants, the Nordstrom or the Marshalls or whatever, but our own community of business people and entrepreneurs. One of our suggestions is to create what we're calling node clusters, to create pockets where there could be a majority of one kind of business. For example, R.T., I know you love the medical arts building, and there's an opportunity to re-envision that center of medical services and expertise that actually would become a draw for downtown. So that's one example of a node cluster. If you create the focus area, then the traffic that feeds that business can also feed and support the other businesses. If you think of it like a garden, right? If you start to create fertile ground, lots of things can grow. David, you mentioned the service-focused skyways. Another element of this 8-hour to 24 hours to create anchor places that people want to be, that they want to visit. And one of those is the riverfront and the post office, and then also creating, as David said, a more people-centric Nicollet Mall, one that has more streetscape greening, so that it is a beautiful place to celebrate how the Nicollet Mall is and was designed to be a connector amongst the villages, so that you can get from the amazing cultural institutions of the Walker and the Basilica and get yourself, it's less than a mile, all the way down to the river. Okay, and then sort of touching on that from the monoculture of the office to the multicultural. One of the things that we learned in creating this report was that what we really need to do to create a downtown that functions for everyone is to involve, and I'm using everyone with a capital E, to involve a diversity of those users that we want to bring downtown. That means a diversity of age, a diversity of race, diversity of culture, socioeconomic. We are all of a certain age. The downtown of the future is going to be used by the people that are 30 and under. So they need to be part of this discussion. We need to include the senior community. We need to include those who would live in affordable housing. We need to include a much broader diversity of race and culture. And it is only through that kind of engagement that we are going to create the downtown that can serve everyone. And that kind of unity is essential to create the community attachment that downtown needs. So I'll leave it there and turn it back to you.
Perfect. I'm going to open it up for questions. As you do that, as you put all of that together, I want you to just walk a few years into the future and take a walk through downtown. Beautiful day Saturday. We're babysitting our grand dog, so we took him for a walk. Went to the sculpture. I had to drop that in. The sculpture garden, walked over to Loring Park across the bridge, and then up the Greenway cutoff over right by the Hyatt. Imagine if we could keep going down a street that was much more of a 24-hour street as we came down Nicollet, where all of these sorts of things happen, and we could take that more active, more 24-hour, certainly greener Nicollet, walking down to the river. Hopefully the post office's parking ramp would be torn down and connecting that. If you think about that and then you walk into the winter and you imagine that people from around the country come here because of the winter, because we are the North, the only city in America that could actually do ongoing what we proved so well at the Super Bowl. If you begin to look at that, I think that the top line narrative is we need to get up off our knees, folks. We need to stop repeating the narrative that this is wrong with downtown or that, or, oh, my neighbors are afraid to go downtown. Maybe your neighbors should stop talking to each other, start experiencing what we do every day, and actually get up off our knees and do what Minneapolis has done decade after decade after decade. This is a vital downtown, specifically because of people like you. So I want to ask you questions, but I want you also to be doing that within the back of your head. What part of this are you going to take on? So let's go. Any questions, any comments? Michelle.
So I have a question that you were talking about bringing the community in, having small businesses. In the report, is there any talk about how we bring that capital or that resource for those community businesses to come on? Because they are small businesses, so having a physical brick and mortar is absolutely an expense that they probably cannot afford on a regular basis, especially downtown. So just wondering how those two go together. We are a bank, you know. Just wondering how those two go together.
Could I actually, while you're thinking about that, because we're in this bank, Bell Bank is one of the best banks for small business, including small businesses of color in this region. Wouldn't it be great if Bell Bank, using its leverage as an extremely important tenant right now for City Center, worked with the owners of this property and said, let's divide up some of these big retail spaces. Let's bring in some of those small businesses, especially businesses of color, to come into this place with these big clear span spaces. You could create wonderful opportunities for that. Each of us using our leverage on it. So that's just a quick, go ahead.
That's a great point, and that is an excellent question. Yet, we don't identify where the money is coming from. wish that I could, right? Oh, there's this giant pot of money at the county that's sitting over there. But what we do is we call out the need for it, and it needs to be much bigger than you think, and it needs to be sustained over time. The other thing that we do is we identify the many people who are working on this right now. And one of the great initiatives that I'm sure you're all familiar with is the Chameleon Shops that's administered by the DID Downtown Council. And that is a tremendous program in which not only do they help entrepreneurs find space, but they provide them networking, they provide them resources, training in business. It's just that kind of program that we need to scale and amplify and highlight. And we as consumers need to go to these businesses and spend our Christmas and holiday dollars there. So absolutely that's needed. I think with the report, there are a whole lot of things that we're pointing to that need millions of dollars. And we point to the fact that those dollars are needed, and that what we need is this dialogue amongst interested people like yourself, amongst city representatives, county representatives, maybe even state funding sources, to figure out how we can come together and coordinate those.
I'm sorry to just jump one more in, but when you think about that, I don't want you to turn off and say, wow, that's a lot of money. Where's it going to come from? In about 1975, people in downtown Minneapolis were thinking, wow, where is their money going to come from to revitalize the block we're sitting on? What they did is they used a tool called tax increment financing, which basically said they were getting a certain amount of tax revenue off this property back then. But if they made a big investment, basically loan public money to this project, it would dramatically increase the property base of the city. Whether this is the most beautiful building in town or not, it is one of the most lucrative ones. It dramatically increased the amount of property tax the city got, and it had enough left over to help fund neighborhood programs throughout the city. When I became mayor, I felt we had used tax increment financing too much. And Councilmember Lisa Goodman and I put a screeching halt on it. It is now time to do exactly the opposite. And I was very happy when we met with Mayor Fry that he agreed that it is now time to make some of these strategic investments where you put money in short term that'll generate more. Go ahead.
I have a question. I'm not sure if it's for David or Beth or both of you. I've heard a little bit about the conversion of big agriculture to residential and how that's become a much bigger interest post-pandemic. But of course, there are challenges with that architecturally and otherwise. I'm curious to hear more from you about what those challenges are and how much of an appetite there is in Minneapolis to actually do some of that, and which buildings are maybe better suited for that. Is it the idea center, or is it other big buildings in town?
The question was about office conversions, right? You can't open a newspaper or a national magazine without reading about how so many other cities have this figured out, like surely this is the answer. And like everything, it is maybe a really good answer some of the time. And in most of the office buildings in downtown, it won't be the right answer. But in some, including some where the owners haven't even thought about it yet, it probably is. So first, from a public policy standpoint, right? Minneapolis, the city, has decided that the warehouse district is the right place for office conversions to happen because those buildings satisfy give good answers to some of the questions that you were starting to pose. The floor plans work correctly, the windows open, the buildings tend to be old enough that they could be eligible for the federal and state historic tax credits. The office rents are not so high that it's so compelling to the owners to keep it in service as an office building, and. And by the way, if you could have more residents in the warehouse district, so goes the city's thinking, you might address some of the other challenges of the warehouse district, right? So like downtown is villages, you heard me say it. when you all think about the warehouse district, many of the issues that you might have in your mind when you do could be addressed by having more people there living in a building all of the time than just coming in some days a week, some hours of the day. So anyway, the city has partnered with the Urban Land Institute to do what's called a Technical Assistance Program, or TAP. So you might read about the ULI TAP. That is the Urban Land Institute and its volunteers giving their professional opinion on which buildings, what kind of programs, what could make this work. That's the public policy side. There's also a group of private real estate development experts of all kind, both architects and developers and property owners that I serve on, that is making recommendations to the city about what kinds of programs could help make more conversions, especially of office buildings, but not only, and especially to residential, but not only, right? So that's a thing that's happening now. But now let me speak broadly. If it's a building that is narrow enough in its floor plate, sorry to make it sound like that. So like, look at these windows and then look how far away the windows are in that direction. Too far. This is not a good example of what would work well for a conversion. So with this building, you could probably stop right there, right? You'd have to cut a big hole in the donut. Thank you to Cardigan Donuts. You'd have to cut a big hole in the donut to have apartments that were shallow enough to have windows everywhere you needed them. And there's lots of office tenants in this building. And so there are office buildings in the core that could make sense, but it is not all of them. It's probably not even most of them. The good news from an economics standpoint is if some office buildings become something else, that's now fewer office buildings remaining, and the less demand for office space is allocated to fewer buildings. So it is also good from that economic standpoint in terms of rent and occupancy for the buildings which remain and don't get converted. Thanks for bearing with that. Was that a lot of what you're, okay, great.
Thank you for bringing up families. That was a major oversight because I think families are essential to bring downtown, whether they are in fact living downtown, and I hope very much that we can increase the number of families downtown, but also those that find it a great place to recreate. And in order, I'll just take both of those kind of nuances. In order for families to live downtown, we need to have what a family needs nearby. We need grocery store, we need safe places for kids to play, and we need schools, and we need them downtown. So part of this effort is to think about what are the things that would need to be here in order to make it a comfortable place for families to live, and how can we work towards developing those? It's like, David will know how many years ago this was, but 10 years ago, there was not a grocery store downtown. And I remember when the Lunds on 12th and Hennepin, we were talking about that coming to town, and it was like, oh my God, that would be amazing. And with that, it means a resident can be like, oh, you know what? I could live here. It would be a comfortable life to live here. And now look at all the we got Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. I mean, they're everywhere. It's fantastic. In order to have downtown feel like a place that families you incorporate into their lives, whether they live here or not, I think that gets to a couple of things. It gets to this sense of community attachment and having experiences that are fun and approachable, welcoming, safe, and repeatable And so part of that is, what do we have that is a draw, right? The Stone Arch Bridge, I think when my kids were little, I did not even discover the fact that the Stone Arch Bridge is an awesome place for kids to run and play until, they were kind of too old to enjoy it. So how do we promote those? How do we create more? I think the idea of the riverfront and the post office conversion is an excellent opportunity. The Commons, just doing a little plug here, that is such a beautiful park, and people don't even know it's there. There are events that happen there regularly, and so again, it's a promotion, but it's also a shift of focus and a change of narrative. So R.T. mentioned getting up off our knees. Minneapolis and Minnesota has a great culture of civic pride, volunteerism, and we can do anything together. And I think if we can come together to re-envision collectively a new downtown for us, and then change the narrative of it's not safe, it's no fun, it's not for me, then we're going to be able to create that, and it will be easier and more intuitive to come downtown. So I hope I answered.
I'm going to build on that great answer with one thing that we could do next year. I was a super lucky kid whose mom taught him to take the bus. So my brother and I, 8, 9, 10, would take the bus downtown, go to the Y, have a great time, go to James Broiler and have a hamburger. It was a great time. The YMCA no longer has programming for kids on Saturday. The YW is getting out of that. There are athletic facilities all over this downtown. There's a great gym over in the IDS Center. Each one of us could work with our buildings and see if we could help create, maybe with the Y, the idea of Saturday mornings, kids coming down and using these amazing facilities. If we don't raise a generation that loves downtown and gets exposed to it, like we're going to be paying consequences, and our grandchildren will be paying consequences. This next year, somehow someone in this room could help make sure that on a Saturday morning, a kid from Minneapolis can come downtown and actually feel welcome here and grow up to be in this position. Go ahead.
Well, I think that we're from the Y, so thank you.
Oh, okay, good.
YM
Excellent.
or YW?
Bingo.
Are you YM or YW?
YM.
Okay.
And
Obviously very sad for the YW and the choices that they've had to make, and are hopeful that people continue to see us as a resource. But with your question around family, I'm curious, with these villages that we're seeing, how do we make the connections? Who's the convener that's identifying the way to bring these villages together, to build the bridges, to promote the activities? Like, who's the obvious person? And the Y would be the first person to be at the table, right? Because much of what we've done to date has been with the downtown council, and that's a very specific monoculture that we're working with. And so,
Well, let me push back, because the idea, first up, I'm so happy you're willing to be at the table. Create the table. The YMCA has the capacity to bring all those players together. And I'm being mean and calling you out. Let me apologize for that. But I want everybody to do that, because there's a downtown council. There's a North Loop Association that's resident. Everybody's got it. But this shouldn't be a top-down thing. That's how you get a monoculture. Well, the downtown council does good work, but it shouldn't and can't do all of that. So I do think we should recognize that messy urbanism means lots of things happen at once and different people convene it. And because I was mean enough to call you out, I would definitely be at that table too. And if you guys got it started, I would make a contribution from the Minneapolis Foundation for Saturday morning recreation program. Okay. So
Does anybody have a pen?
Okay.
I think you raise a really good point. who is the convener? Because the major theme in our report is that community convening is needed, and that it can't be the same old players. Because if we do it the same old way, we're going to get the same old thing. And just to call it out, it can't be a whole bunch of white people in a room. It's got to be more diverse than that. And so that makes it really tricky about who is the convener and how do we I hesitate to use the word invite because it means like come to my house, right? But how do we catalyze conversation amongst these many constituencies in a way that is productive and feels safe, where it isn't just going to be the same old, where we humbly listen and authentically act on whatever is said. You know, a lot of times, I worked in affordable housing for a couple of years, and a lot of times we would think we knew exactly what was needed, right? What we need to do is build this rec room and have after-school tutoring. And the community would come and say, actually, what we really need is a food shelf, right? What we really need is a daycare so that I can go to work. And it's hard when you come to the table with your idea and hopefully your money and it's directed to this, and what the community really needs is this other piece over here. And so we're going to have to come together with that understanding and that flexibility to deliver what's needed. It makes me think, if I can ramble for a second, our project started with this awesome speaker series at the Walker Art Center called Abundant Cities. And that project, that series brought together thought leaders from across the US who are working on city revitalization, community revitalization, big public-private partnerships, public spaces. And one of the main themes that came out of that was you have got to involve all aspects of your community, and you've got to authentically listen. And there's a project in Washington where the Anacostia Bridge project, it's like $25 million, maybe more than that, maybe like $100 million. Anyway, what they ended up doing when they started to listen to their community was they developed a community leadership program. They developed a jobs training program. They developed a community home ownership program. All of these things that have nothing to do with building a park. But that's what the community needed, and now the community is full force behind that park. So, sorry, that was just a tangent of the kind of thing that we need to do.
I'd love to hear more about your vision for Nicollet Mall. It feels like easy fodder every few years. You know, we just got done, revitalizing that strip, and kind of curious to hear more about how you feel like, is it if we build it, they will come? Like, how is this going to help transform retail? How is it going to bring and encourage people to come down? You know, the necessity of the bus line is very important and reliable. You know, it's something that people count on every day. How does that fit into the program? Yeah. Also curious to hear how putting time, resources, and energy into demolishing the post office versus taking that time and energy and resources and putting into the things that you touched on in retrofitting some of the empty office space. You know, just curious to hear how that future vision plays out.
Can I just make one quick clarification? We are not talking about tearing down the post office. Okay. We're talking about tearing down the parking garage that is next to the post office. Is a beautiful architectural wonder. We do not want to get rid of that gem. It's that bad parking garage. Sorry. Do you want to take the next?
Sure, I'll start with Nicollet and David pick up on it. So You know, in one way or the other at the downtown council as mayor and other, I've been involved as a reporter, actually, the first one. So I've been somewhat tangentially involved in all three. Each one of them in some way has talked about the idea of connecting the street and the skyway. And in each case, that plan was removed as people pushed back on it. So number one, we have to decide in this town whether we're going to be dominant skyway or dominant street. If every one of the skyway businesses went to the ground floor, we'd solve Nicollet Mall and everything else like that. So A, we got to get that straight. But B, one of the things that got cut out of this last Nicollet Mall was everything that mattered. I remember walking with the architect who did the High Line, who did this, and talking about this. It was a very, very green sort of effort. A city and a park should have a park in the middle of the city. All of that got cut out of that. That was a huge mistake. It was a mistake primarily because of funding, but I would have prioritized that much higher. More important, right now, if we take the buses off and move it one block to Marquette and Second that were specifically redesigned to be able to handle additional capacity, we could do a lot of things. It is not rocket science right now to recapture part of streets for pocket parks and for restaurants to move out. COVID meant that happened all over the country. Why in the world are we not doing it on this street? The report also has some really fun, interesting ideas and visuals. Green is not only on the street itself, but on the sides of buildings where you can do that. Soften it, create it a much better space like that. Beth also can tell you a lot about trees and where you can plant them or not. That you can't plant, they're planted pretty much where they can be because there's so much under the street. But there are scores of ways to green by putting planters above and other things. David, why don't you pick up?
So the spirit of your question, as I understand it, is why focus and spend so much money on the street that's right outside when there's all the other compelling needs and wants, including some that we are mentioning, right? And like, I kind of agree, right? On the other hand, Nicollet is the main street of our downtown. And downtown, if you can't tell, we think is like the key to the city and the key to the region and the tax base and all those things. So it's important. It matters in our collective imagination, and it matters from is it safe? Can we pay for our programs? How about those investments that people are making, right? So I'll stipulate that it is important. The reason that we have come up with, or are suggesting, a recipe that sounds like move the buses a block or two, still convenient access for everyone who's transit dependent and people who hopefully are choosing to take transit more and more, right? Move retail from the skyway level to the street, convert larger spaces, including in this building hopefully, to smaller ones that are therefore more affordable and can support more entrepreneurs and maybe some artists. We heard one crazy idea, or maybe we came up with it, not sure, of use the existing bus shelters as kiosks to sell things, warming huts, don't completely abandon the infrastructure. It's there, it's paid for, RT's point, but turn it into things that are more flexible, nimble, supportive of what we want today, not give up on the transit, not give up on the great retailers that are here, encourage them and their landlords over time to move those retail spaces to the street level so that there's a place for people to come spend money, yes, but also to show where our priorities are, to demonstrate that makes a difference. And by the way, also for the people who hopefully are choosing to live downtown, right? If it's only for people who we are hoping will visit from the suburbs and outside the region, well, but if it supports the new and growing downtown residential population also, then that's a good thing too. So that's some of it.
I think we have time for one more question. Let me see. Yeah. Oh, Michelle, hold a second. There were a couple of hands going out. You asked anyone else? Great. Go ahead, Michelle. Oh, go ahead. Well, one of the things and I'm really glad you asked that question because we haven't talked about office workers. Yes, we are in a huge transition office, but there is still an enormous number of people working downtown. We as employers are competing now with the home and the convenience. So what do we give them? And we made a decision at the Minneapolis Foundation. We believe in downtown, and we're going to bribe the hell out of our employees to come downtown. We have incredibly fun lunches on Wednesdays. We reconfigured the space to be more collaborative, and we are very much encouraging people to come, but they want to, and that's happening more and more. Some employers, I will call out US Bank, have done an exceptional job in doing that. Some employers have not. And one of them is a public body, Hennepin County. Who lives in Hennepin County? Raise your hand. Do you think it's a good idea for Hennepin County's workforce to be remote at a period of time where they could be doing as much to live downtown? If you don't agree, each one of you could be calling your county commissioner and saying to them in very strong terms, our tax dollars are coming from downtown Minneapolis more than anywhere else. If downtown is stronger, my residential tax base payment and what I'm paying to the county is less. If Hennepin County works remotely and the tax base of downtown goes further and further south, they are going to be challenged. You, residents of Hennepin County, have power. Use it.
There you go. Should we wrap up with something else?
Well, I just want to respond a little bit to your question, and I don't have an answer. So maybe all I'm saying is thank you for that question, because I think that that's something that we need to think about, because the office community is integral, a core pillar to this, to the society, to this ecosystem that we're trying to build. So how do we involve them? I think it's hopefully through this community conversation. It is through creating the spaces that are a draw and that create that sense of community attachment. I mean, there is another plug. There is no better place to spend your summertime lunch than at PV Plaza. That place is drop dead gorgeous. So come summer, I want all of you to be out there and bring a friend.
Okay, I'm going to make a final pitch as we go. I would hope that sometime over the next 2 days, you guys would walk next door to the fantastic Dayton's Marketplace. They've brought wonderful entrepreneurs in again this year. It's a great place, and it is a great way to make a real statement about our great community. When somebody steps up and does something that cool for downtown, support it with your dollar. So thank you very, very much for the invitation to be here and to Bell Bank. We really, really appreciate it.